Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to me, your host, Christian Watson. So, my friends, Jeff Bezos has come under fire recently for going up to space, being the second person to do so, the second very rich person to do so, the first being Richard Branson, going up to space and then making a statement thanking Amazon employees for paying for his trip. He said the following a few days ago, last Tuesday actually, as of the making of this video, July 26, 2021. He said the following on a press conference after the trip. He said, "I want to thank every Amazon employee and every Amazon customer because you guys paid for all of this." The 57-year-old Bezos said during a news conference after becoming the second billionaire in just over a week to ride his own spacecraft. Now, of course, a lot of people have criticized him, as I alluded to before. Bernie Sanders said the following. He said, "Jeff Bezos is using his time to go out and zoom around outer space. Good for him. Poll after poll shows that the American people want him to pay his fair share of taxes back here on Earth." Now, of course, popularity is not a substitute for ethical correctness. There are plenty of things that have been popular throughout history that are morally and ethically wrong. So I'm not sure why Sanders is using that kind of fallacy, especially considering that he goes against very quote-unquote popular things all the time on the basis that they are basis for inequality and oppression. But I rest my case in that regard. Other people, like Senator Elizabeth Warren, have said that Bezos has constantly dodged taxes. Warren tweeted that Jeff Bezos forgot to thank all the hardworking Americans who actually paid taxes to keep this country running, while he and Amazon paid nothing. So, just a fact check here. In 2019, Amazon did have to pay federal taxes for the first time in 2 years. They did, quote-unquote, dodge the taxes, but not through any sort of illegal activities, but instead through corporate welfare tax credits and using the deduction system that is present within the tax code. So, yes, Amazon did pay no federal taxes, no federal income taxes. There are many taxes that a company pays, no federal income taxes for those 2 years. But they did so through entirely legitimate means. So it appears to me that Ms. Warren's gripe is not with Amazon. It is with the means that the government has given them, A, to subsidize them, which is wrong in my opinion, or B, to allow them to keep more of their money, which in my opinion is always moral. You have no obligation to my money, but that's a different story. But my friends, all of this rage and anger is built upon the idea that Bezos, as this billionaire, is going up to space while people are suffering on Earth, and it's an example of egregious inequality. There are just so many arguments along the line of thinking that surround this incident. But I want to submit to you one thing, my friends, because all of these arguments are predicated upon the idea that Bezos owes us something. You know, Warren believes Bezos owes the government to pay taxes. Sanders believes that Bezos owes Americans to pay taxes. People believe that Bezos owes poor people to do something. It's sort of like Peter Singer's idea that if you have the ability to stop an ethical wrong, if at no cost to yourself, you should do it. The idea that I have an obligation to act towards something, not to act against something, or to withhold my acting from something. But I want to submit to you, my friends, that Jeff Bezos does not owe you, me, or anyone else except those who are within his employ anything. Jeff Bezos owes you and me nothing. He only owes something to his employees and anyone else who he has entered a mutual bond with. This talk of fair share and this hatred of billionaires is illogical and has zero moral standing for this particular reason. What do I mean? So, let's explore this concept of fair share. So the idea of fairness is inherently a very subjective idea, my friends. What one person thinks is fair, someone else thinks is unfair. So how have we gotten through this sort of moral contradiction throughout history? How have we decided what is fair? Well, there are a few approaches. One is the approach of proportionality. Is a certain action proportional to X, Y, and Z, right? So if, for example, if someone goes up and punches someone, is their punishment going to be proportional to their action? Similarly, if someone just steals something from a store, is their punishment going to be the same punishment they get when they go and punch someone? Again, this is the principle of proportionality, which has been used to quote-unquote understand and weigh fairness. But those two instances that I just mentioned imply an action, a moral wrong on the part of the person who needs to have punishment. Jeff Bezos has done nothing wrong by simply keeping his money. In fact, it is a moral wrong if we understand how voluntary transactions take place and how value is exchanged, to try to take Jeff Bezos' money or to try to claim Jeff Bezos' money from him due to some arbitrary idea. The philosopher Robert Nozick had this interesting idea of transaction and voluntary exchange. He said that if we can trace the line of a certain product or resource passing through certain hands voluntarily, and we can establish that this sort of chain of transaction happened voluntarily, it is a moral transaction. So, for example, let's say LeBron James is a very big sports guy. Let's say LeBron James gets a lot of money from playing a game that he did. Let's say that all that money came from fans that were eager to see LeBron James and wanted to actually pay him for his talents. Well, LeBron James getting that money is a moral transaction according to Nozick, because people who gave the money to him did so willingly and did so with the knowledge that they were going to get something in exchange. Jeff Bezos has run Amazon for decades, and he has built up accrued capital through smart investing, smart trading, through doing all kind of things, from being ahead of certain trends like cloud computing in the 2000s, which basically allowed Amazon to own a lot of the internet's infrastructure. They're actually competing with Google about how much of the internet's infrastructure that they own. And Bezos has done all of this through, again, soliciting money from people, or through making ways to make money from people by exchanging value to them. So, Bezos, if we understand Nozick's idea of transaction, has no moral obligation to give us anything, number one. And number two, but he has given back a lot to people through the creation of his company. But then there's this other idea, my friends, that is very interesting. It's this idea that someone cannot have a large amount of something while other people have a less amount of something, because that is somehow a moral wrong. This is the idea of equity, the idea that people who are disadvantaged need more resources, more than those who already have these advantages, and their life will be impacted by this, yada, yada. You get how it goes. Well, imagine if Bezos or Branson never went to space at all. Imagine if no one ever went to space like they did. You know, my friends, there is a basic principle of economics which coheres with the order of the natural world, and it goes something like this. When something is scarce in quantity, its value is higher. When something is more prevalent in quantity, its value fluctuates. This is a very basic principle of economics, which is why when you have natural disasters and there is very little water, there's going to be a higher price for the water to protect the water supply, and the inverse is also true as well. If there's no disaster and there's a lot of water, the water's value may fluctuate. Similarly, throughout human history, there have been certain commodities and goods that have been scarce in amount, and therefore have only been accessible to the people who have the most resources. For example, railroad travel was only accessible in the early days throughout Europe and even America to the richest, most successful people. Now, whereas rail travel would have cost you, at least in America, $35, today, the Amtrak will take you Washington, D.C. and Baltimore and all around the place where it goes for about $11. Cell phones. The first cell phone, which was invented by Martin Cooper, who is an engineer for Motorola, the first cell phone in existence cost about $3,995 in its day, in its day, which is about $10,000 today. Imagine paying $10,000 for a cell phone. The first smartphone ever, the Simon, that cost about $900 in 1994 when it first came out, which is about $1,742 today. Today I can get a cell phone for however cheap I want to get a cell phone, really, depending if I want to sacrifice quality. But I can get a good, functional, working cell phone for less than $100, or even a few $100s today. I don't have to fork up thousands of dollars today. Why is this so? Because, again, there are so many more cell phones. The principle of variation is in effect. But if Marty Cooper had never engineered the first cell phone, if the first smartphone had never been invented, the premise from which these conclusions, the conclusions of their invention flow from, would have never been in effect. What is my point? Yes, Bezos and Branson may seem like self-aggrandizing billionaires right now that make no sense, but their going into space is going to be incredibly important for the future of interstellar space travel. Just because Bezos is one of the few folks who can actually afford space travel does not mean that he is not doing us a service by going to space. whereas only 2 billionaires can really afford it right now in 2021, how different will the accessibility of space travel be in 2064? If the empirical facts that I just laid out to you mean anything, then it'll be much more accessible, because there will be many more lanes. The cost will naturally go down after the novelty goes down as well. This is simple economics, yet we are bound, many people are bound, at least on the left, by envy. By guttural, primal envy, which blinds them to the natural progression of the human being, and therefore presents a danger not only to other human beings, but in their own development as well. If you cannot realize that things develop naturally, and some things may have different phases, but those phases are not eternal, you will never be able to live life as fruitfully as you possibly could. This is these mentalities that are being pushed by the left, that Bezos needs to pay his fair share, and Bezos is even going up to space. These mentalities that try to append moral obligation to resource quantity are mentalities that are an existential threat to human progress and to proper understandings of morality as well. As I mentioned to you, Nozick's understanding of voluntary transaction. So, my friends, let's just conclude with this. Jeff Bezos owes you nothing. He owes me nothing. Amazon employs many, many people. In fact, it employs 1.3 million people. And during the pandemic last year, when many businesses were either shutting down or they were cutting pay, Amazon brought on 500,000 people. Not only that, but they raised pay by $2 an hour, and they doubled overtime pay. And not only that, but they also gave a sizable vacation pay to their workers, so if their workers needed to be off with their families in terms of times of emergency, they could be. I'm not saying that Amazon is perfect. Evidently, they are not perfect. Evidently, Amazon has a lot of issues with its workers that it's got to fix out, got to work out. But my point is this. My obligation only comes when I enter into a voluntary compact with someone and I promise them something, at least in this context. Obligation has a more broader context as well. I have an obligation not to harm your life, take your stuff, or rob you. I have an obligation not to aggress against your being. I have an obligation not to stifle you. These are things that are obligations that exist in the natural world. But in the social world, in the world of social obligations, which follow from the natural obligations, Bezos only has an obligation to his workers, and in my opinion, he seems to be fulfilling that obligation quite well. If he is supposed to provide an obligation to his workers, to give them money, to give them capital in exchange for goods and services on their end as well, it appears to me, the empirical evidence would say, that he is 100% doing that. Think on it. My friends, I love you guys so much. If you love me, patreon.com/officialcwatson or PayPal, officialcwatson@gmail.com, or even on locals, christianwatson@locals.com, or Discord, which is in the comment section down below. I love you guys so much, and please stay pensive. Bye-bye, guys.